So this thing's called Cthulhu. It's a like a MIDI effects plugin. It basically generates MIDI. And the author basically said that he created this tool to sort of get him out of these muscle memory ruts that you can get into, where you just go to the same patterns over and over again. You literally can no longer like explore things that you don't know because you've already patternized your workflow. So like what most people use this for, at least as far as I know, is the
Finding
chord
chords.
generator.
Yeah.
And literally you can put yourself into a key and just hit buttons and all the chords will kind of like work together. And then, it's basically like wild stabbing, and then you find what you like and then you start to, hone in on what you actually, end up using. The chord generator I've done a little bit of. It's definitely focused on like dance music, like all the presets kind of feel very like pop music-y. So I haven't had much luck in that space. I've actually had more luck simply using the Rolly, and just kind of fucking up my chords, and it just ends up sounding great, and it gets me out of that muscle memory rut.
Yeah.
But I found a lot of success with this in the arpeggiator. It comes with a bunch of presets you can play with and use, but I find it pretty awesome as like an idea generator.
Yeah, actually, I don't know. I love tools like that, and I kind of am surprised we didn't get more tools of that like that sooner. Like it seems like we're only recently seeing cool tools like that. So I think that was one of the ones that I had heard of too. So anyway, that's cool, and we're on stream now. So do you want to?
Sweet.
What do we want to do?
We can hit it. We can, I guess, talk about. Maybe let's talk about the VS Code extension, because that's always one that gives me a tickle.
Okie dokie, the main project. Let's see if I'll go to this, and do I have it open? So this week, actually, a lot of stuff got done on it. This is sort of the heart of, what we're building. So it's sort of like the main critical path of the main activity of this organization. So it is a good thing to have in this update. Let's see. Let me get this on the screen. So last week we decided to actually, when did we decide to go with the VS Code?
That was maybe 2 weeks ago.
Okay. And then last week I kind of got something working. This week it's actually up to more or less where the prototype was, or is potentially even further along. For a lot of reasons. Let me get some stuff set up so this actually looks right. So one of the things that I love about using VS Code is the development experience for working on this is now like way easier than anything else, because you just hit like debug and it brings up a version of the editor with the plugin running, and like you're not running anything else, you're just running VS Code to edit VS Code. It's really cool. So this is more or less what the tool kind of feels like. Normally you have this file hierarchy view, and in this case with this tool you work with a directory, and that's your workspace, and then as basically all the state and stuff is like kept in that directory, and any code associated with that. So it's kind of like a project thing, but you don't actually work with the files. Instead you work with this kind of explorer that lets you create an arbitrary hierarchy, And do you need me to share my screen with you actually, or are you seeing this on the screen on the stream?
I'm seeing it on the stream.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, and again, this is a lot like Unity actually, or Unreal, or really any game editor has come up with this kind of like arbitrary node hierarchy, and then you can kind of attach functionality onto them by putting components, which are more or less classes, or in this case, these are Go structs. And so, for example, and this is still like early, so it's kind of random examples that don't make sense, but like, oh, here's a server node. In the server, we actually have an SSH server and a web server because I decided to add them both to this. So in theory, now we have an SSH server and a web server running on these ports. And actually, like, when you're working with a workspace, it's running in the background. Oh, that's one thing that we did this week as well, which is your workspace is supposed to always be running because you're setting up automations, you're doing whatever. So it wouldn't actually make sense if the only time you could use it or when it's running is when this editor is running. But that's how I had kind of set it up. So I need some third party or separate daemon that runs that keeps them running. And then I always imagined something like this. So I ended up making a really simple app that knows about your workspaces and then shows if they're running or not. And so in theory, this isn't working yet, but if this wasn't running, if this editor wasn't open, it would show me if it was running. If I wanted to edit it or change it, clicking this would open this editor and I could change whether it's running
cool.
Or not, which you usually leave it running. So this isn't something that you would do very often, but and part of this is that you use the editor to interact with the system, not just build the system. So by opening it up, it gives you quick access to this, and then you can, in this case, SSH server, web server, those are things that you kind of just set up and let run. But if there's other things that you would want to interact with or do, you could do through this inspector. So this hierarchy view on the left is basically this giving access to this data structure, and this tree view is already built into VS Code. I had to build this inspector, and this is more or less ported from the previous prototype, and it's all working now. I had to like fix some support for certain data types and stuff like this. But this actually, what I'm changing here is actually changing Go structs behind the scenes. And as those Go structs are changing as well, their values would be updating here. So you have a real-time interactive view on the data structures that are associated with this. And so the idea is that this is both kind of a read-write, like this is both to see the state of the system, change the state of the system, and in some cases, interact with it. Like there's some buttons we can do. This hello button, you click, it just is printing hello. And then, like I said, and then there's this other concept, which is, so components are just structs. And so this idea that there should be a library of components that you could use or any arbitrary Go struct. But then every node also has this idea of a delegate, which is, you think of it as like a component that's specific to that node that's user definable. And so this empty node here also doesn't have a delegate. If I do add delegate, then now it has a delegate that we can edit. And it's basically just a Go struct here. And I could create a field on this component like, I don't know, something that doesn't have any practical use. If I hit save, and it actually shows up here, and I can edit this value. I can do new types of values, some number. And so you'll notice like it's actually recompiling as you're changing stuff, which is also updating this interface. And you can kind of interact with your code immediately. But the point of this delegate is not just to create kind of user-definable fields, but then the way where you're designing these components is very sort of hook based, so that you can change the behavior of them or extend them or customize them beyond just kind of static values, but by implementing functions that implement hooks in the system. And so, for example, this SSH server, it doesn't do anything. Its handler, though, is pointing to itself. And so it's going to look for a SSH server handler, which actually is in the delegate. So it's like, that's where I can write a simple handler, basically just implementing this method right here. And here it's an SSH server that will just output this message value, and then maybe it hangs up, but you can imagine this message can be something, and then now you have an SSH server, you connect to it, and it says HYR5R, and as I change this, different people connect, they'll see different message. And what else? I don't know, do you have questions so far? This is the first time I've been able to kind of demo components as it's coming together.
Fucking rad. I fucking love it. It's fucking so cool. Oh my God, I want to play with it.
So have you not put it together yet until now, or?
Well, no, just, finally seeing it as something you can use and interact with. Like I knew the mental model and like, oh, you'll be able to do this and that and the other thing. And, but when you open the present and it's a Super Nintendo, it's fucking really cool. Also this sort of process and how you landed in VS Code. I mean, Jesus, this could like revolutionize how people actually code and like how they work. I just loved also that idea that you had this little daemon where like it's like that, oh, that's the process, it opens up, I can edit it, and it's like a way closer mapping to your machine and what's actually happening. And oh dude, it's so cool.
Yeah,
so
I mean, it's pretty well thought out, I have to say. So let's see what else. There are a lot of basically getting the stuff to work, like being able to hit edit on this delegate and it opens it up over here. If you use predefined components like these, you can edit them as well, because the idea is these third-party potential components would be vendored into your project, and so you could just edit their code. Let's see, I think those are like a lot of little things, like just getting this colored in a theme. Like before it was like white, and I would show Rusty and he'd be like, oh, that's really bothering me.
It's really bothering me.
So now it's black. It fits in with the
dark
it looks
theme. Really good. Yeah.
A couple other things that I got working this week. There's this idea of a REPL. It looks like I broke it, but if I start it again, the idea, because I originally wanted a much more, what's the word? Custom console to interact with this system, but having some kind of immediate environment to work with this code is really important. And so that's what this is, ignoring these errors. Actually, what happens when I do an empty thing? All right, so I had a placeholder REPL here. This REPL is actually using a language called Tango, which is a Go-like, is recommended by Flexu. I don't know, you can look it up. I think before Tango, Golang. Oops. Yes, Tango. And so this is, I've worked with a lot, like this could have been JavaScript, because there's a lot of good like JavaScript interpreters, there's Lua interpreters, there's kind of Python interpreters, and so the scripting for this could be anything, and I chose this one not just because it's fast, but it's also Go-like, and so it just makes it a little bit easier to, to use something with the same paradigms and stuff like that. So anyway, with this, you can actually interact with your tree. Like there's the root, and I can find node, I think is the right thing. And so it has an API. I could grab a component like the SSH server. And I believe is the SSH server that I put this hello. This is actually just a method on the thing. Let's see, where is that? So being able to add buttons to this interface is really easy because you're just, am I editing it or not? Okay, server. Okay, right, that's all hello is. Inspector buttons is implemented, and so we exposed the hello button. But anyway, so that's a method, and I can just call that method on here as well in the REPL, which doesn't return anything. And separately over here, we can see that it said hello. So you can interact with your tree structure. And the idea was to eventually turn this REPL into something that was kind of a combination of the dev tools in console, which is a little bit nicer in terms of showing interactive structured data, like you can expand JSON objects and stuff like that. But also I wanted to combine it with some of the visualization ideas of like RunKit and some of these like journal type things that will visualize data in interesting ways, in interesting interactive ways. So that's the REPL. And yeah, so that's I think that's everything that I got done this week, which is quite a lot. Like I can actually start using this and thinking about building components that are actually more useful than some of these placeholder things now. So a lot of progress really quickly.
Yeah, tons. Oh my gosh.
It was a great choice, great decision to use VS Code. Just the fact that once I got to this point, the fact that I could do edit, and I have an editor here that works nicely, because my last prototype, that's where it was tripping up, is like I had to use a separate editor. And what does that mean in terms of like integrating the two systems? And, I'm never going to make as good an editor as one that already exists. Mm-hmm. And so building this system in VS Code and already having all this functionality is really great. I guess that's it. That's my update for the tractor stuff.
Damn, amazing. I'm so excited to see what you do with it next week.
It looks like I forgot I can't do this. Okay, cool. I'm messing with my OBS stuff. So what else? What's next?
Actually I didn't, just to kind of chop it up a little bit, I didn't throw in documentary, but I might as well just give like a quick, update on where the documentary is at. And maybe I can actually share my screen here. I don't know, will it work? Maybe it'll work. We'll find out. Let me know when you see it.
Yep.
So basically doing a documentary for the Hacker Dojo. Hacker Dojo is like super rad, space for hackers to meet and work together. It's sort of like a co-working space, but whenever I say that, people are like, no, it's not a co-working space. So I'm like, it's for hackers. So, so anyways, we got all this footage. And what we're doing right now is creating what's called a rough assembly. Do you see the screen?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Creating a rough assembly where essentially we've gone through all the clips, done multicam versions of all the clips, thrown them on the timeline, and looked for all the parts that are just great. Mm-hmm. They're just great answers, like regardless of your through line, your story, or whatever. So I think Mark is nearing the end of the rough assembly. There was a ton of footage, so that was a bit of an undertaking. The next step is we are going to do a 90-second trailer, because we want, like we've been talking about, we want a space to prototype the feel of the documentary. Mm-hmm. We want to find like what feels good, what's right, what's the cool story that resonates with people. So that's what the next week is going to be about, putting together a 90-second doc or a 90-second trailer.
Is there any bits you want to share? Good clips?
Oh, I was freaking deeply impressed with this dude. Do you know this guy?
I don't know. What's the name?
Uh, do you see him?
Yep.
His name's Mike Migofsky.
I don't
He's the
know.
creator of Pebble.
Pebble
Um,
Watch?
Pebble Watch. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So I guess he has some ties to the dojo. He like went there and he
Yeah.
was a member. Um, and now he's like a partner at Y Combinator. He's just like super interesting stories, and so much so that the book that I chose this week, one of them is a book that he recommended on his Twitter. Um, he's super cool, dude. Yeah.
Can you
Uh,
play something from it?
oh, sure. I don't know if it's going to play audio or not. Do you hear anything?
No, is it playing?
It is now.
No, I don't hear audio.
Um,
Womp womp.
yeah, but maybe next week I'll route the audio. So. But it's really cool. It's coming along.
Cool. That is exciting. Yeah, and Hacker Dojo anniversary is coming up. It's October something, 9th or something.
4th and 5th, I
4th
think.
and 5th. I'll be there in Santa Clara or whatever city it's in now.
Yes, Santa Clara, Thomas Road, I think.
Cool. Let's see what else is on our list. Program TV.
Yeah. Were you able to get that up and running and streaming?
Well, so yeah, the is actually one of my goals for this week is to get Program TV back up. But unfortunately, I was a little bit not only was I putting it off, but then using the Unraid machine involved reconfiguring it and stuff for the way I wanted to use it, because it's, if you want to switch between connecting to it with VNC and using a monitor, you have to restart stuff, and that creates all kinds of things. So you helped me through that. And I got it to where I can use it. I actually have it here. My screen sharing is set up here. And so this is it running. And so I had just installed like VLC and OBS.
Oh, badass. Nice.
So this is something that will just sit here and stream Program TV, which is a separate channel that I had just started. Right now it's just hosting Program, but eventually that's where the old Program TV stuff will be streamed. And so because that's such a passive thing, especially for now, it just needs to run in a VM that I can quickly get to. And so it's kind of the perfect initial use case. It doesn't really require any special hardware or audio interfaces or anything. So great starting use for this fucking machine.
Excellent.
So that's my update for that.
I've got a fun little Unraid potential horror story. And so, you mentioned the woes of Unraid earlier. So earlier this week, I was moving around how my drives were configured. I had some SSDs in my array that I wanted to move to my cache drive. And so, I was moving things around, and like there's all these, articles about how to shrink your array and do all this stuff. And at one point, I had turned my array back on, and it's like formatting and doing this, and then I go to like my shares, and they're like half of them are empty, and I'm like, no. So I hit stop, and thankfully there are a bunch of mechanisms in Unraid that will mitigate disasters like that. So luckily I didn't lose everything.
What happened?
I was basically trying to move to shrink my array and then increase the size of my cache drives, my cache pool. And if you pull out a drive and just like get rid of it, it doesn't like automatically rebuild what you had on there. It's this little confusion that I wasn't that I now know how it works. So basically, like if you remove a drive from your array, that data is emulated through the parity drive. But if you actually like remove that drive from your drive definition, it doesn't rebuild the missing data on your array. It will just, it's gone. So rebuilding is a very different process from simply modifying your array configuration.
Mm-hmm.
It's not implied. Now, the rest of Unraid, as far as the arrays go, is really pretty intuitive. So I was expecting that to be the default behavior. And when it wasn't, I was like, I was very worried. But luckily, it didn't. The cache drive wasn't formatted, so I was able to move it back into the array, and then it was all back. So I was like, oh, thank God.
Yeah.
So like what most people do when they shrink your array is you rsync all the files to another drive on the array, and then you remove the drive, and then you shrink the array and all that stuff. So.
Well, I'm glad you're making all these mistakes first.
Yeah, that's it's good. But yeah, I just thought I'd share that little story of woe.
So you wanted to hear about this 2D game that I was working on?
Hell yeah, sounds awesome.
Well, why don't you explain what your interest is in, or what? How did you hear about this? Did I tell you about this? I guess I did when I did a brain dump, huh?
Yeah. Brain dump. You mentioned this idea, and I just loved it. I loved the idea of a 2D battle royale game. I find myself like loving 2D style gameplay. Like I've never really fully bought into like third person, that whole thing. I feel like it's kind of clunky in the way it feels. So I love the idea of a popular game type coming to a format that I like. And then I love the idea of like how far can you push it? Can you like add like 1,000 people into a game, and like the insanity that would ensue. And it made me think of that fun experience we had in Via 313, where Rusty pulled out this game that he made, and it was intentionally designed. Well, I don't know if it was intentional, but because of the size of the screen, it created this constraint that was very fun, and it was like everyone's trying to push their way into the buttons and stuff. And that's sort of what I imagine the experience will be like a dab of chaos.
Yeah.
And I love that.
Yeah, I think so the story. So well, I guess here's the prototype that I worked on this week, and I actually did the initial stuff for this a number of weeks ago, and I've only just started getting back into it. I guess what we have right now is pretty simple platformer using some tile assets from Itch, just something that works. Made a stupid map, which is this level, and it includes basically collidable things. The game is written in Go, and I'm using a library that's relatively new. There's not a lot of Go frameworks for games, but it's they've finally gotten to a point where you can do stuff like this, and this is about all I needed from it. And then there were two things that I wanted to accomplish. One was, and they're sort of related. One was doing a game like this, which if you think of a basic platformer, it's easy to find tutorials on how to implement them. It's very straightforward by now. The difference here that I'm trying something new is entity component system architecture, which is basically a way to approach designing your code that isn't so, traditionally games are very like class-based, object-oriented. And you still have that here, but it's a little bit more of, I really don't know how to describe it, but it's kind of combining this idea of you have abstract entities and then they have data components, which just represent some aspect, some data about it, like, and different types of entities will have similar components. Like any object in the world is going to have a position, and so position data or physics data, like those are components that can be put on any entity, and then you write a system that just iterates over all of the entities that have that component, and it'll do whatever operations on that component. So your physics system will just iterate over everything that it knows is a physics object and apply forces or whatever, and then whatever, and you have all these systems running in parallel. It's a very different approach, and one of the benefits of it is that it really sets you up nicely for multiplayer network code. And so I've always wanted to do, I always like doing network multiplayer games for a lot of reasons, but over the years I've tried to stop doing that because I get too caught up in building the multiplayer networking stack stuff. And now if I wanted to do it, I would want to do it in Go, and that's not known as a good stack for making games, so like I just kind of avoided it by not doing multiplayer games. Here though, I've realized I wanted to experiment with, actually I was inspired by something I saw on Twitch. They had done a ROM hack for Super Mario Brothers, or their recreated Super Mario Brothers. You play the first 4 levels, but it was a battle royale game. So there's like 100 people that come in and load up in the Mario first level, and then you all race, and you race through like the first couple levels, and then after 4 there's like a finish line, and you top 1, 2, and 3, but I think you can kind of sort of interact with people, other players, but it's basically a race. There's no fireballs, which was interesting. To me, it was just a race, but I thought, what if you did have those interactions? So then I was thinking, okay, Battle Royale platformer with those kinds of interactions. And I also like doing things with like traps and environmental stuff that you can interact with. So that's all stuff I felt like I could experiment with here, and I could validate ECS. First of all, play with that model. I've never worked with that model before, and doing a game in Go, which I'd never done before. So trying out some of the APIs and libraries that are available now, and then doing network multiplayer, which I can do really well if it's in Go, and will be relatively easy if I get this ECS system working. And then based on some other talks, that becomes a foundation for doing really reliable network code, basically implementing what Overwatch has done. They had a great talk and talking about how they designed their system, which is one of the better implementations of that kind of thing, and it's based on years of like best practices, and so I'll try to implement that here. So this is a side project, and basically before before this week, I had basically this platformer and this idea that it will replay what you do when you get to the end. So I can move around here, and then I can go up to this gem, and then it starts over, and I can play again, but then it's going to also replay what I last did. And so this is basically a step, and then we can replay again. And so I was doing this because I had to figure out a way that I'm going to be able to simulate like 100 or 1,000 other players. And so being able to collect basically being able to collect your input and replay that is really helpful, because then I can also then start sending that over the network to see what the latency is like, and then that very quickly turns into a network multiplayer system. So and then having this becomes a way I can like generate a bunch of play data to simulate a bunch of players. So this is kind of whatever. I got the replay system working, and then this week I started getting started on the network stuff, which is because right now this is all kind of single player, and that replay is a local thing. It's just local data structures. But now what I'm doing is I'm setting up a replay server that will, all it does is you stream your inputs to it, and it will record the replay data. And then when the game resets, it will stream that replay data back over the network. So it's not a full network game, but it's starting to get the data and that loop in there, so that I'm working with network latency and everything from the beginning, and getting a sense of how to build the system around that. And then from there, that can iterate towards an actual game where I'm running the simulation on the server as well, etc. So yeah, that's just a little bit of progress that I made on that project. This has, I don't remember what all I came up with rationalization for this, but there's definitely a lot of other interesting long-term implications for this project, and that's related to other things, but it's probably not worth getting into now.
Well, it looks pretty rad. Rad.
So is that everything, or do we have book share time?
Yeah, books. Bucky times. Here we go. Here, I'll just throw it at you. So last week I actually did a non-technical book, so I thought I'd do a technical book this week. And because I just came across this by looking at the Notion's Twitter, Notion, the note-taking app, their Twitter, they had this picture of like a stack of books, and it was like very artsy, and it was like, these are some books that inspire us. And this book is called The Visual Display of Quantitative Information.
Oh, Tufty.
Yeah. Oh yeah, it's all backwards. I love it. But it's pretty cool. It's exactly what you'd expect. It goes through describing like how to make good visualizations for data, and understanding how you can manipulate them, and showing good data. Now, this wasn't the first exposure to this kind of thinking for visuals that I've come across. Most recently, I read this book called Factfulness, which is a pretty popular book right now, and it has to do with this essentially understanding visualizations of data, understanding statistics and how to read them, and understanding how they can be manipulated to tell a story. Now, whether that story is true or not, that's a whole other thing. But that book had an overarching sort of through line that statistically the world is becoming a better place, regardless of what people may think or be propagandized to feel. It's a really cool book. So this is cool, but if you're interested in getting into like looking at graphs and data and how to interpret them, I would actually start with Factfulness.
I believe that Tufty book is part of a series of 3 or 4 books that all have the same kind of like format, different facets of that topic. I forgot. It's been a long time since I looked at them. It'd be good to revisit. Well, I haven't had to think about visualization stuff for a long time. I went through all that stuff and got the fundamentals, the essence, and then internalized it, grokked it, moved on. But it's always good to revisit that stuff, because I don't know. I think people don't appreciate like revisiting stuff, because every time you read something or learn something, it's in the context of your present state. And so,
absolutely.
10 years later, you're in a totally different state. You're going to get totally different things out of it. You're going to see things you didn't see before. And if you got something out of it the first time, it's very likely you're going to get something out of it the second time. And so that's kind of one of the reasons. I mean, for me personally, like program TV, some of what I put on there is like talks and stuff, but some of them are very influential, like inspiring talks that changed the way I thought or would come back to and watch again naturally every now and then. And so now it's kind of nice to have, like, I can just go downstairs and put on program TV and like, oh, this is an interesting, like, it's a talk I've seen like maybe 10 times, but I'm going to watch it again because it's going to like give me ideas or inspire me in some way again. And so
Absolutely.
yeah, I remember when Tufty was all the rage. I have a book. I might not actually have a physical version of it, but here is the Amazon page for it, The 4 Steps to the Epiphany by Steve Blank. The book that launched the lean startup revolution, that looks like a new thing because lean startups didn't exist when the book originally came out, but it was very influential to Eric Ries, who wrote the lean startup. Eric Ries worked at IMVU, which is where a lot of my friends in the Bay Area were working, and so that's where a lot of them and why I had been influenced by a lot of that way of thinking. But the 4 Steps to the Epiphany has slowly become kind of a sacred text of Silicon Valley, just because it formalizes one of the most important and underexplored parts of the entrepreneurial or business startup bootstrapping kind of thing, which is finding your market, or that what people call product market fit, and how that process is totally the opposite of what traditional business management and stuff. It's customer development, customer discovery is very much an iterative process. And actually, one of the things is it helped me realize that there is a trade-off if you decide to be an entrepreneur. In a way, you have to, if you want to be successful, there's some degree of having to give up what you think you want to make, because the market is the gatekeeper to success, and the market is not something that you can control. And so if you want to make something, you really have to iterate. You've heard the word pivoting before. You might end up doing something totally different than you originally started to, what your intentions were. And as an entrepreneur, if you really want to, if you don't have grand aspirations of like doing something specific like I do, being an entrepreneur and you want to be successful or whatever, means giving up on like a particular vision, which is why, there's some conflict there with me, but it's still very useful tools and models. Very influential book. Steve Blank,
I just kindled this one.
Steve Blank also did a really cool talk that I actually put on Program TV.
Really?
Called Secret History of Silicon Valley. He's given this talk a couple of times. Maybe the Computer History Museum is the one, the best one, but it's kind of talks a little bit about pre-computer Silicon Valley, and it talks about basically the origins of Silicon Valley starting from World War II, and where the sort of like Stanford startup connection happened. Stanford is very sort of associated with like startups and Silicon Valley startup culture. This explains why that is, and explains a lot of sort of how things are structured in Silicon Valley. And so it's very interesting and is not talked about very much, but it's a very fun talk. So 2 things, 2 for 1, Steve Blank.
Love it. Yeah, that talk is interesting because YouTube shows that I watched the entire thing, but I'm like, I don't recall this, so I'm going to watch this at some point today.
Let's see. We're at 45 minutes. That's
Nice.
a pretty good. What was our target? Like 50 minutes?
Yep,
Wow.
I think so.
We're already great at this.
I know. Basically perfect. Like, I'm getting closer and closer to like my stream not looking super shitty.
Well, I like how before when you're like, well, it's not ideal, so you know, framed your, you did a Mr. Robot framing.
Negative space. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's like, yeah,
It's
that
like,
was
no,
really
it's
weird.
intentional. I'm like, yeah,
Yeah. Yeah, at least it's a little more normal now.
yeah. Uh, okay, I guess that's it. I'm gonna stop, and I guess thank you everybody for watching and listening and whatever. And I'll talk to you next week and come back to my stream and we'll hang out. Okay.
Yeah.
Goodbye.